So continue on with my learning of Odin and trying to fully understand some of the packages that I feel like I'll be using a lot throughout my time using this programming language. I'm going to be talking about the print functions found within the format package. Now, I want these videos to kind of demonstrate how I've gone about learning this myself. So anybody who might be new to programming and isn't used to sort of reading documentations or looking into other bits of code that are linked to the compiler can kind of see how I managed to learn what I learned. If you're looking for a quick, concise example of how to use it, these videos aren't necessarily going to be for you. That's why I'm labeling them like learning vlogs, not just putting the title like, hey, this is how you use it. So anyways, the way that I have learned this information about the print functions is on the Odin website. If you just go to odinlang.org, there is a documents tab. And Odin has a bunch of code already created for it. So you as the programmer don't have to do everything from scratch. There's a bunch of standardized things that every programmer kind of expects to have when they use a language. And one of those things is being able to print text to files and the console window. And we find that kind of stuff that you would kind of expect a programming language to do for you in the core packages. Then we also have the vendor packages. I'm not going to be looking into or talking about in this video anytime in the future. This is essentially other bits of code outside of Odin itself. And these are things that get used a lot in other these are libraries that get used a lot outside of Odin and other languages like Python and C++. And the people behind Odin, I'm not sure how much, if it's just the one person Ginger Bill, how much of it is a collaborative effort. I've never really looked into that much, but somewhere along the line they decided, let's make it so you can just drag and drop these things essentially into Odin. Anyways, the print function we have inside of the core folder. And the print procedure, I should say procedure because that's what they're called in Odin, is found within the format package, so fmt for short. And if you just navigate on the side here, we can find, I'm just going to search for it somewhere, and there we go. If you just search FMT, you'll pop over onto the right tag. It'll show up somewhere on this list as well. We will click on FMT, and this is one of the main ways I'm learning the Odin programming language. There's also a book created, which is linked somewhere in here. I forget the name of the book. It might just be odinlang.org. I'll link it in the description of this video. It's actually a really good book. For learning Odin, I don't think it's the best book for learning how to program, but for learning Odin itself, really good. And what I then do is just go down and I look at the procedures. This is why I wanted to understand what procedures I can have inside of this package and how I can use them. And I just clicked on the print ones to start with, and that takes you straight to the print procedures. Now there's 4 of them, and a lot of the procedures inside of this have a kind of naming convention to them. We have prints, you're going to be printing information to somewhere. And then you can have the printf version of that procedure and the println version of that procedure, or you can combine both of them together. So if you just have print on its own, it's going to do the most standard thing possible. If the print function ends in ln, like this one down here, it means it's going to do the same as print, but it's going to append a new line on the end of it. And if you see one of your print procedures with inside of this package where the F stands for format, which means you are first going to pass in a formatted string, then you're going to pass in the variables that will kind of replace the placeholder values of that string. And that is what format it is. I'll show you an example later on when we start programming with these procedures. And again, you can combine them to print FLN. So we're going to be printing a formatted string and we're going to be putting a new line after that string. So if we look over here at the most basic print statement, we can read the description and it says print format using the default print settings and writes to OS standard out. So whenever you kind of print something inside of any programming language, the default way that happens, you print it, and then your console window or terminal emulator, I think that's a proper word in Linux, will just display that text from what you have printed. And you can see here os.standardout, so std out, that's the standard output. If we then were to go over to the OS package by navigating over here, I have it right here. Inside of the OS package, we can see there's some variables. There's org, standard standard in, standard out. And the standard output is the standard way of outputting information. It is, to my understanding, just a file, and this file essentially is linked to the console window or terminal, and whenever you pass something to it, immediately gets printed out to the actual thing. So if we were to click on it right now, you will see inside of the OS package right now, it is just a handle. So it is a handle to some file, and you can redirect that output. You don't have to have it in the console window. You can say standard out, please take on a new file. You can generate your own file, and then you can say standard output you are equal to this file. So all the text gets dumped on that file instead of being displayed to the console window. I might make a video of doing that later on. There's one thing to note though, it says it prints to standard out, and this is the standard out that it gets printed to right now. However, Odin, as I'm making this video, seems to be in a transitional period between OS and OS 2, where if we were to click on OS 2, there is a note down here that says things are subject to change, mostly still working. When things are finalized, this message will be moved. Essentially, what's happening is OS 2 looks to be eventually going to replace OS. So right now, this formatted anything that prints to standard out is printing to the standard out variable in OS. But eventually, sometime early next year, I think it is, they will change to print out to the variable that is inside of the OS2 package. So if I was to click on the standard out here, previously it was a handle, but now the standard out in this new version of the OS package is going to be printing to a file object, or it is going to be printing to a pointer to a file object. That's something worth noting for the future. But I believe once everything's implemented, it should be done in a way that you kind of don't need to know that information to use the print function properly. It should just automatically transition to using the correct version of standard out. But I thought that's important to highlight. And if you want to go into more detail about this, you can actually look into the implementation of print itself. If you have Odin on your computer, you will probably have all the files attached to it. And we can go over here to a new window. All you see on the screen here is the text contained in one of the files that the Odin compiler uses itself. So inside of my Odin folder, this is where I got the Odin compiler from GitHub. Inside of the core library, remember in the beginning of the video, we had the vendor libraries and the core libraries. So inside of the core ones, we have the fmt package, the fmt directory. Directories are essentially packages inside of Odin, to my understanding. One package belongs to one directory. I believe that's how the overall build system of Odin just works. It's very nice and simple. Not perfectly, don't 100% quote me on that, but I think that's the way it works. And the print function actually lives inside of fmt_os. It doesn't live in fmt Odin. It's kind of a layer down below in fmt_os. And if we were to open this up, which I have over here, so I'll just close this so you know where I've navigated to. We can see here, we have the print. So we have the actual implementation of this here, which we can find in the documentation. And it says print formats using the default print settings and writes to Odin and writes to os.standardout, as we saw where that lives. And we can look what it takes in. It takes in an arguments. This .any is a type inside of Odin. If you're to read the documentation furthermore, it's kind of described any is something that can take in a variable. This .any takes in like a variable list of arguments, and it can be of any data type. I'm pretty sure there's a note there that says as a programmer, you shouldn't actually use this. It is only intended to be used for these types of functions that are printing out data. If you really know what you're doing and fully understand how this works, which I actually don't, you could probably find a unique way of using this to your benefit. But for now, you see the any word with the two dots here. Just think, I just need to pass in a list of things, and I'm going to be using it for some type of print function. And if you actually look at this procedure, you see that it actually returns an integer, and it returns a fprint. And so if you look into the actual implementation, we can see here this is the body of the function, and all the body is doing is actually calling up here. It is calling this fprint up here. So realistically, if you didn't want to use print, if you wanted to go an even lower step down to see what's working, you could probably just call this fprint. However, I wouldn't recommend doing this, not for the sake that you shouldn't. If you want to, really go ahead and learn. It's how you get better at programming, by just fucking things up and making mistakes. It's the best thing to do, although the reason why I would say not to do this if you're just printing regular things to the console window is these procedures here that come with Odin, they're kind of there just to abstract all the technical details away. If you know you want to just print something, that's why the print procedure works right there. It's very nice, easy, it's descriptive. Other programmers who are familiar with Odin or any other language will know exactly what's happening when you see a print procedure. You'll know, oh, it's going to take my string or whatever, and it's just going to print it out. But we then see we have a separator and a flush. And I do believe this flush here is what makes it print out to the console window. I think if you were to set that to false, it might not do that. I've not looked into that enough. I think that's how the file immediately gets dumped into the console window. I'll have to play around with that myself. But we also see here that we have the print new line, the print format string, and the print format new line. And each one of these respectively calls its own version of the fprint. So again, you can just come up here and you could probably just get away with just calling these. However, makes the code a little bit harder to read. But yeah, that is the implementation of print. So we'll see how this works now. And this is, again, I'm just kind of demonstrating this to show what I'm doing to learn. I'm going into the things, I'm looking at the actual implementation of the code to see what they call, how they are functioning. I think it's a very valuable thing to do if you're trying to learn a language. I probably will never ever call this procedure in my life. I just might never bother. I might never have a reason to. And that's fine. But it's interesting to know how it actually works. I will probably always just stick to using these regular print functions. They will service my needs probably 100% of the time when I just want to print information somewhere. But anyways, if we were to go over here, I have the most basic Odin application ever, one that just has the package main and main procedure. Oh, well, it doesn't have to be called package main. It just has the package keyword at the top with a name. And this does absolutely nothing. So if we were to then want to print something out, the first thing that we need to do is import it. And then we need to tell Odin. So import takes in a folder name. And then with inside of that directory, you give it the package that you want to actually import. If there are sub packages inside of that, I believe you then do a / followed by that. So if I only wanted to use the print function, I believe, no, actually the file is there. It's not a folder. But if you only, I've messed that explanation up. But yeah, if you want to get the print function, you need to import fmt, and that's how you do it. So what we want to do is we want to say we're using fmt, and then we want to get the print in. So the most common way anybody will see how this works is you do your print, you enter in your string, and then to become a programmer, you say print hello world, or I think it's hello in Odin. You then back out, save your file, and then you do a odin.run, or Odin run dot, sorry, and that will print out hello world, just like that. That's how it works. But if we remember from the actual implementation of this function, is that this takes in the any type, so it takes in a list of arguments. And that means that I don't just have to say print hello world. What happens if I want to have some numbers? Well, I can do this as well, just print out a bunch of numbers, and then I can go back into some string, and then maybe I just want to print out a Boolean value of true. If I can spell true correctly, I can save out of that, odin.run, and you can see it's looked at my list of arguments. It goes, well, print hello world, 1, 2, 3, and it just printed everything out in its textual format. It takes the Boolean value true and just prints out the word true. It takes in the integer value that I put there and just prints it out as ASCII characters to my console window. And if we go back into the implementation of the function, we see that there is this separator parameter right here. And right now it is defaulted equal to just a space character. So what happens if we go into the print and we go, that is good. We want all these things to be printed, but I don't want a space between them. Maybe I'm making a CSV file. And if that is true, what I can do is I can go separator. I do not want them to be separated by a space, but I want to have a comma be the separator because these are going to get put into a CSV file somewhere. And then I can just go odin.run. You see we're printing everything out again. But this time, each thing I passed in, this argument, this list of elements, is separated by a comma now rather than just a space. And you can make this anything you want. I imagine the main case you'd probably use a comma. But if you had a particular type of file format you were going for, or a particular way you just wanted your information to be displayed for whatever reason, you can turn that into anything you want. And you can see now that everything is being printed out by this little ASCII arrow that I just wrote. And that is very useful for us. Now, what I did say, and what I think, because again, this is a learning blog for me. I'm not trying to posture myself as an expert. I actually 100% know what I'm doing. There is this flush. And I believe because standard input is a file type, by flushing this file, of flushing the buffer, that is what makes it go straight to the console window. So I'm going to try turning this flush to false right now and just see what happens. So we have the keyword flush, and it is a Boolean. So if I type this into false, now this might automatically print anyways when the application ends. Yes, if there's a way I can add in a delay to this. Unfortunately, I haven't got around to actually taking in user inputs to Odin, but I feel like if I put a delay in there, that's one thing I need to go over. I'm just learning the print functions right now. I've not actually looked into getting user input, but I feel like if I had user input here and I didn't immediately flush, that might stop this text from being outputted immediately. Yeah, don't 100% quote me on that one. I believe that's how it works under the hood. That's what flush actually does. It flushes the buffer and then dumps it out to wherever standard input is going to. But yeah. So what we have here is, ignore that little experiment, but that's how you learn. You know, you try something, you fail, that is fine. So we said that there is the prints, there's print new line, there's printf and printf new line. So what happens if we then go print new line, and then we take a few of these and then we paste it a few times. As a matter of fact, to illustrate this better, if I was to remove the new lines, what happens? Why do we want this new line sometimes? So if I just print this out right now, you can see everything gets printed out into a straight line. That might be what you want with your print function. You might be formatting your strings in your text in a particular way. But let's assume that's not what you want. You actually want everything to come out on a new line. So we just do new line here. And then we do Odin.run, and we see everything's being nicely formatted for us like that. That is great. And then we have printf. So we'll get rid of these right now, and we'll have a look at what printf actually does. So if we do printf right now, and then we'd try to just come out and then save this, what is going to happen? We're going to get an error because there's no parameter named sep inside of this. And we can confirm that by looking at printf. We have our formatted string, we have our arguments, and then we also have flush. We do not have separate inside of there. So what we can do, go back to our program, and then we can just get rid of this. Hit it, put in that last bracket, and then we run it again. What happens? It doesn't quite get printed out properly, does it? We get the hello world, but then we get all this little text here. So what is actually gone on there? We can kind of understand and infer here that something has gone wrong with the exclamation mark, and we have extra. This means that it has printed out correctly the first part, but then it's found all this extra information that it doesn't know what to do with. And that's because formatted strings expect you to first pass in the string that you want to get printed out. And because the first thing we pass in here is a string, it goes great. We're expecting a string. We know this to be true by looking at what the first parameter of this procedure is. Format is a string, so that's what it's looking for. And then it is looking for a list of arguments, and it wants to figure out how to pass these arguments into that string. And I'm sure if you were to follow the code by going to printfln, if you were to follow all of this and go through all the lines of code, you would see its actual implementation and how it is working. But the gist of it is if we were to just print out the string first, we'll see we do not get that error because the first argument is expecting is to print out a string, and the dot any type doesn't matter if there's nothing there. So we get the print hello world. Now, let's say that in my string, I wanted to also print out some numerical value. We want to incorporate that in that string for whatever reason. So we'll go back out, and then we want to say, hey, because before up here, look, hello world printed out, and then the numbers got printed out, and that's perfectly fine. That worked great. So Odin.run, and there we go. We're getting this little error again, this extra 1, 2, 3, because this is information that we have passed in, but we've not told the string how to handle the information itself. And the way you do this inside of formatted strings is by kind of putting placeholder variables inside of there. And the default placeholder variable is just %v, which I think just stands for value. So if we do this right now, and then we go Odin.run, we get hello world 1, 2, 3, and it gets printed out exactly as is. Now, to go back into the documentations, well, how did you know you had to put %v in there? The first thing is I'm used to other programming languages. I have learned a little bit of C, so I've seen the printf function before. I'm understanding how that works just from prior knowledge. But let's assume Odin's your first shot at programming. How would I know that? So inside of the core FMT package, up here, you can see that this is where we have our placeholder values for these formatted strings. And you can see there, %v, the value in default format. And there's a long range of all these different ones, so you can get really accurate with how this information is displayed. Another very useful one in here is %T, an Odin syntax representing the type of the value. So what happens if we go back in here, inside of nvin, and instead of the v, we pass in the %t. And then we pass in Odin.run. We can see hello world, but instead of 1, 2, 3, what is actually being passed back to us is the type, the actual data type that is being placed in there. And there's all manner of reasons why you might want to actually see the data type get printed out for you. Could just be for simple debugging, or maybe you have some application. I can't quite think of an example right now, but where knowing the data type is more important than knowing the actual value stored within that data type. So if we go back into Odin right now, the advantage of the formatted string over the regular print is we saw, if I go back out of this again real quick, we saw up here that all we could do was we could pass in a list of arguments that we want to get printed out of any data type. It didn't care. We weren't getting any exceptions. So strings, integers, booleans. But the only thing we could do was we could pass in some thing we want to print out. Then we could separate it. Next thing we want printed out by some separated value. Next thing we want printed out by some separated value. And if that's all you're doing, like in the case of the CSV value, where everything was separated by a comma, that's great. What happens if you want a more human readable form of things being printed out? You want an actual structure to your prints that a human can better understand. Where, let's say that you have a name of a person, and you want to print out their name, and then you want the age of a person, and you want to print out their age, and I don't know, you might have some other Boolean variable here where it is over 21 because you're looking at the name of the person, the age of the person, and you want to quickly infer, is this over the age of 21? You can probably understand if they're over 21 by just the V. But the example here that I'm trying to get at is you can now say, well, the person is named Jack, and the age is 29, not for too much longer, almost 30, terrifying, and I am in fact over the age of 21, unfortunately. Wish I could stay young forever. So what happens now when I try to print this out? Well, you can see that I have a nice formatted version of that string. Instead of being forced just to put in a single separated value, I can actually go, well, his name is Jack, their age is 29, and they're over the age of 21. You can still see here that the commas are there. I should have taken the commas out. I put the commas in myself, but the commas don't need to be there, just in case you're thinking, oh, this still got commas. So yeah, we'll take the commas out. So the formatted string is when you have some information that you want to present in a more human readable format, I would say. I would say that's why I would do it. And I think a lot of the cases when you do this, it is for debugging if you don't have an actual debugger attached to anything. And you're just learning to program anyways. Printing out values like this can be a lot more helpful for learning in my experience. And just as we mentioned before, we have the LN version of this. So there is a way this works inside of Odin with the naming format. If you've looked through it, you will see that there are some other print functions like the A print and the T print, and I think one was the E print, and I think another one was the string builder print. So SB stands for string, but I'm not going to go too far into it, but E stands for error, T stands for temporary, and the A stands for allocated. And each of these procedures has their formatted version, as well as the new line version or the formatted new line version, and the F always comes first and the L comes second. We're just looking at the print, the standard print right now. I'm not trying to get into extending this video into the A and SB type of prints. I'm going to make one of them later on. And what happens here is, again, for illustrative purposes, let's say that I want to not have the new line like this, and I'll just change a few values around here real quick. Speed that. You can go to that, and then you can go to false just to show that they are different strings being printed out. So Odin.run, and you can see, just like last time, we're getting it all in one big line. Depending on what you're doing, that might be fine, but maybe you want a more easier to read for the human, or maybe you need the new line because you're doing a CSV file. So we're going to go back into Odin, and then we're going to append, I think that's a word, not prepend, append the ln onto the end of the string, and it is always this way with the procedure names. If I try to do this, that procedure doesn't actually exist. So we're going to get an error right now. Odin.run, it's going to go, hey, you've tried doing this print function, but I don't actually know what this name means. And the compiler is nice enough to go, it looks like you're printing something. I'm guessing because we have the word print in here, there's some trigger on the compiler that says, if you see the keyword prints in the format package, but it doesn't quite match, just give them the list. And the compiler's nice enough. Did you try to do print ln, or did you try to do a print f? So it kind of helps you out there. And I'm just going to remove this one. So we'll get rid of that. No, we didn't want to do that. That was a mistake. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to clear this actually. Make it easy for you to see what we're doing. And you can see here, now we have the nice formatted strings, but on a new line. And they have a different value here, the print false. I must have deleted the one where I extended the number. But yeah, that is my little talk about the print function inside of Odin, how I've gone about learning it and the resources that I used. Also, just the end of the video, if you go to the Odin home page, is it documents? Yeah, Odin documents and the Odin book. I also use this book to learn Odin right now. I found it to be a very good resource myself. I'm coming from an already somewhat experienced programming background, so I'm not sure as a new programmer how helpful you will find this book. I believe somewhere in here, the author of the book, this person down here, Paul Zelensky, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. I feel like I remember reading somewhere in here that it actually highlights that this is but somebody who might already know the fundamentals of programming, like what an if statement is, how to do a while loop and a for loop, or they've been introduced to the concepts before, so they're not new. This book is very much targeted to teaching the language, not necessarily the core concepts of programming. However, I would recommend this book, and I will leave this link in the description below of this video for anybody who's interested. Again, with using the actual documentation and looking into the implementation of the code to see how it works. So yeah, this again is a learning vlog. This is for me personally because I find these style of videos useful for just reinforcing what I've already gone over. But if anybody does find them useful, that is great. And yeah, if you watch this far, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.